I'm Alan Greeley, and I love thinking and meditating on Scripture. Another word for it, which we don't use very often, is pondering. When the mother of Jesus heard the shepherds retell the vision of the angels' celebratory singing, the Scripture says Mary treasured up all these things, pondering them in her heart. That alone is my goal with this podcast. I want us to treasure in our hearts what we hear from God and ponder it. It would be an honor to have you listen in and ponder with me. To God be the glory.
You have been so good to me.
Ponder with me about the oldest institution that we know of in human history, marriage. I've been thinking or pondering about marriage a lot recently. The reason being is that my wife and I just passed over 15 years of marriage. November 6th is our anniversary, exactly 2 weeks ago. I've been thinking also about marriage because I'm scheduled to teach a Bible class about marriage and parenting starting January 1st, 2025. We'll be studying on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. at the Plainfield Church of Christ in Indiana. If you've been listening to the podcast and you live fairly close by and have never been to the church and that topic is of special interest to you, I want you to feel invited to come. Please join us. It starts January 1st, every Wednesday at 7 p.m. for about 3 months. The tentative plan is to do about 6 classes on marriage and about 6 on parenting. I'm excited about it. I've been praying about it, and we'll continue to do so, that it will be beneficial to us all. So between the anniversary and between getting ready for the marriage class to begin in January, it's just been on my mind a lot, but especially been on my mind of late because on our anniversary dinner date, my wife asked me a profound question that opened up quite a healthy discussion. Here's what she asked. What year of our marriage was the best year of our marriage in your mind? And then she followed it up with, what year was the most challenging year of our marriage in your mind? And I told her those are great questions. I found it hard to answer. I told her I'd have to think about it a little bit, and then we kind of got distracted at dinner talking about this topic or that, and the dinner was served, and we talked about the food and how great it was, but she wouldn't let me off the hook. She reminded me that I needed to answer what was the best year of our marriage, what was the more challenging year of our marriage, and I was still struggling, and she even teased me at one point, Alan, are you struggling because they were all that challenging? And I was like, no, of course. In fact, I told her, and I'll share with you, in 15 years, there has been so much good and so little challenges. I'm not sure any year could be termed as a challenge. And since they were all good in their own way, it's difficult to choose which one is best. And since they were all good in their own way, it's tough to label one as a challenging year. I know many of you listening do not know Vera and I very intimately. But with all sincerity and honesty of heart, we have a tremendously great marriage. We truly do. It's been like that from day one. There hasn't been a rough patch. There wasn't like a learning period where we had to learn how to deal with each other's quirks, and I've got a lot of them that she's had to deal with. We didn't have to grow into a healthy marriage. From my perspective, it started wonderful and has continued to be that way. It's not perfect. It's not perfect. I don't believe any marriage is perfect that has 2 sinners in it. Vera and I are flawed people, and so the marriage isn't perfect, but it is great. It is wonderful, and I'm blessed to have her. But alas, she forced an answer out of me. I gave her what I thought was the best year of our marriage and what I thought was the most challenging year of our marriage. What those years were, I'll leave between us, but here's what I will share with you. What I found so enlightening and a little alarming, maybe surprising is a better term for it, the best year and the more challenging year was because of the circumstances that surrounded those years. It wasn't necessarily because of us personally. We are the same people in many ways. I understand that we're all growing over the years. The things that we were passionate about at the beginning, we might not be as passionate about now, and hopefully we are all growing and developing more into the image of Christ, of course, that we've been predestined to be conformed to that image. So yes, we're growing wiser, we're maturing, and we're growing more spiritual, but our convictions and our commitment and our love for each other, still the same. What made a great year from a challenging year wasn't what we did personally, it was the circumstances around us that either allowed us to focus on each other more, or the circumstances around us that were drowning us and distracting us from each other. Our convictions and our commitment and our love for one another hasn't changed. What changed was the circumstances that caused distractions, the added anxieties that distracted our marriage, the added responsibilities that distracted our marriage, the added stresses that distracted our marriage. It was never, ever about commitment or love for one another. That has never wavered. I pray to God it never will. The things that wavered, the things that changed, were the anxieties and the stresses and the responsibilities that distracted us from each other. But here's what pricks my heart when I examine those distractions and when we had a good, healthy discussion about it. Most of the time, the anxieties and the stresses that distract us are things that we choose. We choose to put them in our lives. Better yet, we stuff them into our lives. Better yet, we cram them into our lives. We fill our lives with such added stress sometimes that it does nothing but distract us from keeping a marriage healthy and strong. Please understand me. I'm not saying that all added anxieties are our own choosing, our own fault. I'm not saying that. If a husband or wife becomes ill or becomes diseased, of course that would add stress on a marriage. How could it not? If a husband or wife has to work out of town a lot and there's a lot of separation for days, weeks, months because of the job, that would add stress on a marriage. How could it not? So there are outside influences that we might not have control over that cause a little extra pressure, but most of the time, those influences that cause extra anxiety and stress that take us away from each other are things that we can control, and we have to eliminate them. We must. For the glory of God in our marriages, for the benefit of our children spiritually, for the examples that we set before the world. If there is added stress that is taking away from our marriage, get it out of your life. Your marriage and God's glory through that marriage and your example to your children and the world is worth it. Listen to this paragraph from Paul in 1 Corinthians 7. When I read the passage, you're going to think to yourself, how does this apply to this topic? Alan, you must have chosen the wrong passage. At first, you might think it's a strange passage to choose, but hang on to me. It's 1 Corinthians 7, 32 through 34. Paul says this, I want you to be free from anxieties. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious about the affairs of the world, how to please his wife. And his interests are divided. And the unmarried or betrothed woman is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to be holy in body and spirit. But the married woman is anxious about the affairs of the world, how to please her husband. Now, the reason why that may seem like an odd passage to read is because Paul is blatantly encouraging people to stay single. He says, if you stay single, you can concentrate more on spiritual things instead of trying to please your husband or your wife. But here's why I chose that passage for us to consider. Paul is saying that when you marry, not a sin, he admits that later on in the text, the real life approach to that marriage needs to be, this is your service to God now. What can I do to please my wife? From a husband's viewpoint and from a wife's viewpoint, what can I do to please my husband? Paul says it's better to stay single. If you can focus on spiritual things, then that's great. That's good for you. But if you married, not a sin. But here's what Paul is advocating. Your perspective now has to change. What can I do to please the other person? This is your service to God now. What does my wife want? What does she need to feel loved? What does she need to feel pleased in this relationship? And if you're a wife, Paul says, that's fine, not a sin. But your real life perspective, your service to God now, in a limited way, at least, is this. What does he want? What does he need to feel respected? What does he need to feel pleased in this relationship? Married couples, if you want to glorify God through your marriage, that has to be the dominant thought, what the other person wants. And what I'm teaching, though, is this. Sometimes the circumstances that we've crammed into our lives are weighing on us so heavily, drowning us in all of the anxieties of life, that what the other person wants and needs isn't even coming to our mind. Too busy, too stressed, too anxious, whatever. Now, going back to the amazing question my wife asked me during our anniversary dinner date, what year was the best year of our marriage, and what year was the most challenging year of our marriage? The difference between the best of times and the more challenging times was never about conviction, commitment, or love for one another. Those things never wavered. It was about being distracted, taking our eyes off of each other, taking our eyes off of what my spouse needs in this moment, in this time, on this day. And I really mean break it down that simply. What do they need today? What do they need this week? If you're married, I greatly encourage you to ask your spouse what Vera asked me. What was the greatest year of your marriage? What is the more challenging year in your marriage? Share those years with each other, and then dig a little deeper. What were you doing during that great year? What were you not doing? What were you avoiding? What was your work schedule like? What was the money situation like? During the challenging year, what were the circumstances like? What were you avoiding? What were you focused on? And perhaps you'll be surprised like I was. It simply came down to distractions or the lack of them. May God bless your marriage. Second only to God, it's the most important relationship you will have on earth. It's worth investing in. And that investment starts with this question. What can I do to please them? What do they want? What do they need to feel loved, to feel respected?
There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found something to treasure in your hearts and ponder. The song you've heard is Reckless Love, sung by Praise and Harmony on their album, Resurrecting God. May God's face shine on you always.